You ready to proceed?
Yes, Judge.
Go right ahead.
Thank you, Judge. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the chance that I have to respond to the arguments made by Mr. Jarvis. As you might imagine, I have a very different view of the evidence than he does, and I think you do too. He started off his closing by telling you that Russell Holbrook's story hasn't changed. Really? Did he listen to the same interviews that we listened to? Because I'll tell you one thing, it changed every single time. He put up a timeline on that screen. You know, for Russell's first interview, almost that entire screen could not have been accounted for because he said he was home by 9. What do you mean his story didn't change? He immediately followed that up with that Russell was consistent about Wednesday and Friday. When he was first asked, when was the last time you saw Miss Melissa Howard? He said it had been 2 years. How do you go from 2 years to, oh yeah, I saw her 2 days before she was murdered? That's right. How do you forget that? You don't. You lie about that. And then he admitted when confronted. So you remember the question, when was the last time you saw Melissa? Long pause in that recording. I think it was 2 years ago. It's been a long time. I think it was at a birthday party. Not 30 seconds, a minute later, however long it was. Were you there Wednesday the 4th before she was murdered? Yeah, I stopped by. I think it's reasonable to assume he didn't realize that he had been found out. But law enforcement knew. He then started going through some of the factors of weighing the evidence. I talked about a couple of them with you. He talked about a couple. You have the full list from the judge. One of them was interest in how the case should be decided, and that's one that he mentioned. And he wants you to believe that this case was personal for FDLE. You know who this case is personal for? David Russell Holbrook. That's who it's personal for. That's why he's lying to law enforcement every time he talks to them. This isn't personal to law enforcement or to the government. This is personal to Russell Holbrook, which is why his story changes. Because as he gets caught in a lie, like the time he got home, like going to Defuniak on Wednesday, that never happened. The reason he's doing all these lies is it's personal for him. He has an interest in how the case should be decided, and he thinks he's smarter than them. He thinks that they will listen to him. And that's why he is giving these inconsistent statements. To say that this is personal to FDLE because of Annie White works in Tallahassee. There's been no testimony that Jennifer Hattler knows who she is, by the way. And Megan Palumbo testified that the case was restricted. Annie White had no access to this case. Somehow because the victim has a relative working for FDLE, that means that it's all personal and they're just falsifying evidence? Come on. There's too many people. There's no way that could actually be true. Mr. Jarvis said that these new agents took over and they were aggressive and they were in a hurry. What hurry? In the trial, a piece of evidence came in as an email chain, and he kept asking the witnesses, what's the hurry? What's the hurry? Go back and look at that email chain. It started in December. It concluded in March. Is that a rush? 3 months of them discussing how the YSTR process was going to work? What hurry? It's not there. He used the phrase several times that, well, they're stretching the science. Did you miss the part that their defense expert agrees with the state experts on quite a few points? She agrees that Sakan Worf's testimony was valid. She agrees that the contamination of B20L was after the B20E swabbing. She tried to say, well, I wouldn't be able to reanalyze it after that, so that's how it affects it. That does not affect the original profile, and it would not prevent her from going back and swabbing that part of the shirt. B20L is now not usable. That has nothing to do with B20E. He talked about the elaborate security system that Melissa Howard had. She had a camera, she had phone recording systems, and she was scared, and he said possibly of Brian. I agree she was scared of Brian, and anyone in his circle. That's what Carrie Winkler told you. She was scared of Brian and anyone connected to Brian, and Carrie specifically told you that her mom said that Russell was in Brian's circle. So yeah, I'm sure she had cameras because she was afraid of all those people. He also claims that she wouldn't leave her door unlocked on a night like this, and there was no evidence of forced entry. Carrie Winkler and Daniel Bretthauer both testified that the door was usually unlocked. When Carrie was out on a date, she was 15 at the time, her boyfriend was 18 or 19. When they went out on a date, Melissa would not go to bed until her daughter was home, and she would leave the door unlocked for her. Carrie was on a date, therefore the door was unlocked. She did not have to let her attacker in. He could just walk right in. If she's sitting on the couch watching a movie, and he barges in the room, it's not going to take long at all for him to subdue her. Not at all. He didn't have to break in, he didn't have to be let in, he could just walk in. He mentioned that there was no murder weapon recovered. That's true. I told you that in the beginning. I apologize that Russell Holbrook didn't leave his knife behind. We saw a trail of Melissa Howard's blood going down the sidewalk and over the driveway, and we swabbed every single one of them to make sure, is the attacker bleeding? Apparently he wasn't. I think that is consistent with a weapon being carried out of the house, because who's going to leave it behind? Come on. And nowhere did the judge tell you that I have to present the weapon to you. That's not one of the elements. We know it was a knife because of the medical examiner testimony. You can look at the wounds, you know for yourself. The fact that he destroyed the knife has nothing to do with it. He also said there's no evidence of the defendant's blood at her house anywhere. Well, maybe he didn't get cut in the process. Maybe only Melissa Howard got cut that night. Mr. Jarvis wants you to believe that this took some time. It was not quick. Ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you this could have been very quick, especially if there was more than one person. And what did Russell tell you? He told you that Michael was with him the entire night. From leaving the birthday party to dropping the kids off, whether or not they went to a gas station and to Walmart, Michael was with him. There was plenty of time for this to have been accomplished. He made some mention of Chris Craven had suggested Melissa bring the dog in. The dog was still outside. Maybe Melissa didn't bring him in. So? Maybe at that moment is when Russell came to the door. I don't know. That doesn't change anything. That's not relevant. He brought up the statement allegedly made at the birthday party that the defendant extended the offer to other people present to see if anybody wanted to come too. You want to come with? Who was at that party and why in the world would they go to take his kids home? The people remaining at that party were his girlfriend Gina with her small children, Haley and Faith, one of whom was sick, apparently. Why would she go to take the kids back? She wouldn't. Her parents were there. Why would they go to take Russell's kids back? They wouldn't. If he did in fact invite people to go with him, he knew no one would take him up on it because there was no one in their right mind who would do that. I would suggest also that the witnesses who say that he made his statement, his daughter and his sister-in-law, they have a bit of an interest in how the case is decided. Mr. Jarvis made another mention to the timeline, and he talked about the defendant's timeline being home by 10. The defendant never said that. It was, I was home by 9, it was home by 9:15 or 9:30, it was home by roughly 9:30. The defendant never said he was home by 10. I mean, I guess if you're home by 9:30, it's also true you're home by 10, but that's not what he's saying. He's saying he got home about 10, which, by the way, if that were the case, he'd have even more time to commit the murder. But that timeline is not Russell Holbrook's timeline. That's Greg Grover's timeline, based on routes that he drove in 2018 and 2019. In any event, there's plenty of time to have killed Melissa. Mr. Jarvis started throwing out other options of suspects. Chris Cadenhead was one. He testified that he had planned to leave his wife. They were in love. His marriage was on the rocks. She confirmed it. He's going to just kill the woman he loves? And then there's the mention of the pregnancy test. Chris Cadenhead testified that he knew her tubes were tied. I thought her tubes were tied. He even kind of asked it that way. I was told her tubes were tied. Medical examiner confirmed that. It was. Mr. Jarvis also said that Sherry Cadenhead is the only alibi in the 9 to 9:15 range. That's inaccurate. She testified that he arrived home between 9 and 9:15, that he stayed there an hour while he was taking a shower, getting his hunting stuff together, and playing with their daughter, and then left about an hour later. Then we saw the phone call about 10:18 where he'd forgotten something and went back to get it. So he's trying to make this 9 to 10 o'clock hour, oh, there's no alibi for Chris Cadenhead. Yes, there is. We know where his UPS truck was. We know where he was. He was with his wife and daughter. Switching to Brian Howard, he got off of Chris Cadenhead and went to Brian Howard a little bit. And he talked about how there's no testimony that Brian Howard and Russell Holbrook were close friends. Tried to insinuate that Michael and Brian know each other through work, which I agree they do. But there was testimony that they're friends. Carrie knew who he was. Taylor knew who he was. Carrie knew him from when Melissa and Brian were married, knew Russell. Taylor knows Russell. Goes to look at Russell's new truck. There is plenty of testimony that they are friends. And then this was interesting. Mr. Jarvis said, Brian goes upstairs, never to be seen from again. No. He went to bed, Karina was there, and did you catch one of them saying, until the police showed up? He was still there. When Melissa Howard was found dead, police went to Brian Howard's house. There was testimony about that the police came in the door, and they were looking for Brian. He was there. None of this he's never to be seen from again. Come on. He then moved to the crime scene evidence, and he talked about Haley Hill and how this beer bottle wasn't collected. And, then there's the trash can with the wipes with something red on it. First of all, she testified it looked pink to her. She's testifying for her own memory, not just the pictures. And she's trained to recognize blood. So in a woman's bathroom trash can or bedroom trash can, whichever one it was, she saw wipes with something pink on it, and her training experience was not blood, so she didn't collect it. You can say all day long, well, it just wasn't worthy to be collected as evidence. It didn't give any indications that it was relevant because there was nothing to suggest that it was blood. He left you with this, we'll never know what it was. Speculative doubt, possible doubt, forced doubt. That's what he's doing. That's what the judge said should not influence your verdict. All throughout here are distractions. Doesn't want to talk about V20E very much. Doesn't want to talk about all the inconsistencies in his stories. He wants you to believe they're all the same. Confusion, distraction. Don't fall for it. He said this several times. He said it in opening, he said it again in closing. It's extremely difficult to piece together 1 hour from 13 years ago. Well, guess what? We don't have to, because he was interviewed in January of 2006 and again twice in February 2006. We didn't ask him to reconstruct his life from 13 years ago. We asked him at the end of January, hey, when's the last time you saw Melissa Howard? And he said it had been 2 years. He doesn't have to go piece his life back together. His statements were close in time to the murder. And the most Mr. Jarvis will recognize is that there were some discrepancies. No joke. Did you notice on his timeline that now Danielle is home by 9:10? And they're taking the phone call and subtracting back. And okay, so Danielle probably got home at 9:10. Do you realize Russell never said that? First statement, he dropped them off and then he himself was home by 9. Second statement, they were home exactly at 9. Third statement, they were there at 9. But in this timeline, as they're lengthening it, now all of a sudden Danielle doesn't even make it home till 9:10. That's inconsistent with everything their clients ever said. He then referenced the driving times from Greg Grover, 19 to 21 minutes to get to Staff Road. No testimony about how long it would take to go the alternate route. That's because it's 2019, not 2006. By the way, the defendant, one of his interviews said it was 15 minutes. You can go back and listen to it. One of his interviews, he was worried about making it on time. That was one of his versions. He claimed it was 15 minutes, not 19 to 21. That's 2019. You all know that. That's common sense. Mr. Jarvis apparently does not agree with my characterization of the Walmart video, but you saw it for yourself. They're standing there in that aisle. Michael is kind of walking around. He's agitated, moving around. Plain as day goes, why would he do that? And actually, he did it again. He gets closer to Russell and kind of, his back is turned to the camera a little bit. You see his hands move again. Ladies and gentlemen, at that time, Melissa Howard was already dead. They'd already done it. Had blood, or afraid of having blood on him. He's checking his hands. Mr. Jarvis said it would take about 7 minutes to get home, which would put Russell Holbrook's arrival time at 9:47. That's also later than anything he ever told law enforcement, although he claims it's right in line with what he said. That's not true. And then he said again, his story hasn't changed, might have been mixed up a little. I guess you could call it that. Or you could call it about lying about where you were on the night that Melissa Howard was murdered. Now then he said when he was back at the party, witnesses were saying he's wearing the same clothes, didn't have a change in his demeanor. He asked Russell Holbrook's sister-in-law that question, Melissa Sully. Do you think she's really inspecting Russell Holbrook closely for whether he has blood on him? Not her husband. What reason does she have to inspect him head to toe to see, have you by chance committed a murder while you were gone? She wouldn't have. I'm not saying he did or didn't have blood on him. I'm just saying she wouldn't have noticed if he did. There were comments about where's the motive. I'll tell you one thing I agree with. Brian Howard has a motive for the murder of Melissa Howard. Absolutely does. Remember the phone calls. Why is it that when Michael and Brian talk on Friday, Michael immediately calls Russell seconds later? Why is there another call at the time that Taylor's being dropped off? Why is there this advanced communication between Russell and Michael and Brian? No, you won't see a phone call between Russell and Brian. Do it to Michael. Mr. Jarvis also told you that Russell Holbrook went to go see Melissa to ask about Allison. Now, he didn't go to ask Brian, he needed to ask Melissa. His interview said he did ask Brian. He didn't get enough information, is what he claimed. But Brian was his friend, and according to Russell Holbrook, he did ask him, but he wasn't satisfied with the information. I just came to the part about the confusion about Wednesday night. There was no confusion about Wednesday night. There was lying about Wednesday night. That's all that was. You haven't seen someone in 2 years, all of a sudden you show up out of the blue at their house 2 days before they're murdered, and the day that she was murdered was the day she was supposed to get full custody, and the conversation was about, you need to let that boy be with his father, you need to let this go. You know what the motive was. It's being passed from Brian to Russell. The defendant claims, once he admits that he actually did go to Melissa's house, he claimed that he flagged her down and then asked to follow her. There's been no other testimony that that's what happened. That is his story, one of them that he gave to law enforcement, and that there was nothing threatening. And then Mr. Jarvis called Janice Berg's testimony strange. What was strange about that? She returned a call to her client. Her client was in tears, saying, I knew this would happen. He just left. Brian sent one of his friends to scare me. Just 2 days before custody is supposed to change hands. There was nothing strange about Janice Berg's testimony. There was something very revealing about Janice Berg's testimony, because now you know what was the real reason for that visit on Wednesday night. It wasn't to talk about Allison. there was the talk, and Mr. Jarvis tried to say that it's, it's kind of how brothers talk sometimes. It's a little crude. But it's not the way he's saying it. So there's the talk of Melissa being found naked. The quote was, she would have to have been naked for that to be true, because he's thinking semen. He's thinking it had to be sexual. Well, she would have had to be naked for that to be true, implying he knows she wasn't. But then he catches himself and says, well, I don't know, maybe she was, and he laughs. Remember, they suspect they're being recorded. They kind of slip every now and then, but then they'll say something as if they catch themselves. He knows she wasn't naked. Mr. Jarvis asked you to listen to the 4-minute and 5-second mark of the first interview where he admits that he was at the residence on Wednesday. I'd encourage you to listen to the first 4 minutes where he says he hadn't seen her in 2 years or been to her house. Mr. Jarvis says that we've had the same information in 2006. There wasn't enough to arrest. There's still not enough. That's not true. We did not have Russell Holbrook's DNA. We did not have his DNA standards. YSTR testing did not become available to FTLE in 2012, according to Second Wharf. When Jennifer Hattler took over this case in 2015 and developed the forum profile, now that YSTR is a possibility, we know it's not Michael. She excluded Michael. She looked at his DNA. It's not him. But his brother's a suspect. Let's see if it's familial. So they send it over to Jacksonville. They run the YSTR, and it does match Michael and his brother. We get a search warrant for Russell's DNA, and then we have a match. That is something law enforcement did not have in 2006. There was new evidence in the case. The sweatshirt wasn't new. His standards were new. Now we have this unknown forum profile. We could look at it and say, it's Russell. He was there. Mr. Jarvis tries to point out the weaknesses of YSTR testing, saying, well, the profiles aren't unique, and there's software limitations, and you only had 8 of 17 locations, and is that enough? Is that what you want the government to be doing? That's how he phrased it. His own expert said she would have written the exact same report. She agrees with all of it. Distraction. Distraction. Mr. Jarvis said there was no debate about the defendant being at Melissa's the night of the murder. What do you mean, no debate? I absolutely debate that. He was there. His DNA is on her body. And think about where it is. His DNA is here. As if you're grabbing someone and slitting their throat. You come up behind them, or maybe he's just grabbing onto her. That's where he would grab. This area actually could be exposed through her putting hands up. Remember, she had to cut a slice on her thumb? She's resisting the best that her 115-pound body could do. She's holding her hands up, finger gets sliced, opening this up for him to either grab her or spit on her in some way in the struggle. That's how his DNA got on her body, and you have no evidence that it came from anywhere else. You know that his DNA is on her body because he killed her. He was there that night, and you know he was. When Mr. Jarvis started moving on to DNA, he gets back to the stretching the science argument, and then he brings back the pressure. There was so much pressure that it made Jennifer Hattler make a mistake. There's pressure on her because of Annie White, who's one of our own. There's pressure from the case agents being in the lab. Ladies and gentlemen, not one witness testified that evidence was actually being processed at the time they were in the lab. It was being opened. One wanted to see what are the areas we're talking about. That was for subsequent to the original testing. I called Candy Zuleger on that yesterday. No one said that Jennifer Hattler is there doing swabbings and taking cuttings with agents standing over her, putting pressure on her. That did not happen. You have not heard that. then he wants you to start speculating. Because he knows, I mean, you've heard the B20L contamination was subsequent to B20E. It has nothing to do with it. But what if it did happen in B20E? What if there were other mistakes? Speculative doubt, forced doubt, imaginary doubt. That's what he's bringing up. There's no evidence at all that there's anything wrong with the B20E sample. Mr. Jarvis talked about DNA being the gold standard, and we're used to numbers being put in and data being spit out. No, that is not how that works. If that were the case, then anybody could just do it. Just give it to the machine spits out the numbers, we're done. No, it takes years of training and education and experience to be able to interpret DNA. Interpret. You saw what she did. She has peaks on a graph, and she has to be able to interpret in her training experience what's actual DNA, what's background noise from the instrument, what's a mixture, what's a single source profile. And she's figuring all that out, and she's trained to do it. He also started saying that if it's only 2 donors, the defendant has to be excluded. That's not true. The rules that he put up there say that you can't do X, Y, and Z unless there's an assumption of 2 donors and then that's reported. And it was. He's not breaking any rules here. She told you she believes there are 2 donors in that sample. There's a possibility of an additional contributor, but she can't say for sure, is that a separate person's DNA or is that background noise for the instrument? She's not breaking any rules. She's not stretching the science. And by the way, when she developed that foreign profile, she didn't have his standards. How is she supposed to make it all come out right if she was taking that swab a year before she had his standards? She's not sitting there thinking, Russell Holbrook is not going to have a 29 at this marker, so I need to figure out what I'm going to say about that. She had no possible way of knowing that. She was making those decisions based on her training and experience. It's interesting. Mr. Jarvis says that this was not a match. Ladies and gentlemen, the testimony is, yes, it was. It was a 1 in 39 million match. Do you remember when I asked Candy Zulegger, can you exclude Russell Holbrook? I said, no, I can't. Their own expert cannot exclude Russell Holbrook from this DNA sample. Why? Because it's present. Because it's a 1 in 39 million match to him. She can't exclude him because it's his DNA, because he was in the house, because he murdered Melissa Howard. Mr. Jarvis went on to say that if the DNA is not a match, that leaves a whole lot of people who could have left it. Really? Because Jennifer Hattler had already excluded Brian Howard, Karina Howard, Chris Cadenhead, Michael Holbrook. She'd already gone through all of them. She said, doesn't match any of them. Mr. Jarvis, said, well, I know Melissa Howard, she was a good mother, she had these good kids. No one wants to disappoint Melissa Howard's family. I'm not asking you to make a decision as to whether or not that's going to disappoint her family. I'm asking you to make a decision because that man is guilty of first-degree murder. Ladies and gentlemen, I think you heard. He said there's no confession. It got darn close. The wiretap call, Russell Holbrook said, they can't prove you were there with me. They can't. Michael said, but they can. Russell said, they can only prove you're with me at Walmart. That's all they can prove. Those are not the words of an innocent man. Those are words of a confession because he knows that he murdered Melissa Howard. You know it. You have that abiding conviction of guilt because you've seen the evidence and the testimony and you know that he was there, that he killed her, that he premeditated her killing as he left her to die in a pool of her own blood. You know that. And now I'm asking that you go back to that jury room and you turn a verdict of guilty as charged, first-degree premeditated murder. Thank you for your attention. I very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drake.